Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Does he stand by his statement that the vast majority of people will be better off as a result of his tax switch on 1 October 2010?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, yes, and if the member disagrees and thinks people have been made worse off, he would campaign on reversing the tax switch. And I notice he doesn't want to do that.
Mr. Speaker, if the vast majority of people are better off, why is the Federation of Family Budgeting Services this morning and every other social agency reporting that more and more people are coming to see them in debt? And why is Baycorp Advantage Debt Company expecting a massive spike in debt increases by Kiwis by the end of the year?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, well, for one reason, they were allowed to run up a lot of debt because of the policies of the previous Labor government. That's actually the reason. And secondly, Mr. Speaker, as one would have thought that member would know after 30 years in politics, that when there's a recession, of course those low-income New Zealanders struggle. But the good news is those low-income New Zealanders are being looked after by a national government.
Mr. Speaker.
2 long years haven't done anything. My question to the Prime Minister, how easy would it be to reverse the tax switch?
The Honourable Right Honourable
Mr. Speaker, as Mr. Carter pointed out on television the other day, it would be extremely straightforward to reverse the tax switch. Well, he was your friend once, actually. But anyway, but for the most part, Mr. Speaker, it would be simply a matter of crossing out the existing tax rates and putting in the tax rates that applied before 1 October. But the reason Mr. Goff doesn't want to reverse the tax switch is because alongside dropping GST, he would have to do the following. 1, he'd have to raise income taxes across the board. 2, he'd immediately have to reduce benefits. 3... Sorry, I haven't finished.
Order. The Honourable Darren.
Mr. Speaker, I would have thought after 2 years in government the Prime Minister is responsible for the policies of his government, not speculating on the effects of the policies of another party, which is what he's doing now by going through the initiatives being put forward by the Leader of the Opposition.
Very worried.
Order. Now this time, members of the House know the rules, that when points of order are being heard, they should be heard in silence. And there's just too much noise there. I realise I always knew it was going to be a robust day today, but we've got to be reasonable in this. Now, the Prime Minister was saying, in his view, what would have to be done were GST to be brought down. And he was saying what Mr. Goff would have to do. But that's not saying that's Labor's policy. That's saying what he believes. And I don't think that I should necessarily rule that out because he's not alleged that's because he mustn't allege any policy to Labor unless he's quoting from any reports. But to describe what might have to happen, I don't think is unreasonable in his view. It's in his opinion. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this is not... Let me make it quite clear. Despite the mobile charade that went up and down the country with Axe the Tax, this is not what's happening. That's exactly the point. So, Mr. Speaker, he would have to go out and tell beneficiaries that he's reducing their income. He'd have to go and tell superannuitants their income's going down. He'd have to reduce working for families. He would have to increase companies' taxes.
I think, Right Honourable Prime Minister, we've heard quite enough. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, after 2 years in government, when is the Prime Minister going to accept responsibility for what his own government has done, particularly when the recovery is stalled, prices are going faster than wages, and he looks after his rich mates?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I accept responsibility every single day. And I speak for the government. My president doesn't speak for the government. I speak for the government. But, Mr. Speaker, let's just go to this very helpful chart that was produced. Hello, how are you, Desert? Let me just refer to this very interesting chart that was produced by the Minister of Finance yesterday, because it shows this. In the last 2 years of Labor...
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Order. Order. Honourable Leader of the
Mr.
Opposition.
Speaker, I think you're familiar with the standing order that talks about the conciseness of both questions and answers, and we're just getting the usual litany of rubbish from the Prime Minister.
No, I say order. When I'm on my feet, I mean the Leader of the Opposition may wish to leave the House. If he's not careful, he will. And his deputy may go with him if they're not careful, because I just invite the Honourable Leader of the Opposition to reflect on the provocative question he asked. A very provocative question. Now, he cannot expect me as Speaker to stop the Prime Minister from giving a pretty political answer. Now, if the members want me to clamp down on Minister's answer, I'm very happy to do that. And you'll note when they ask straight primary questions, I stopped the Prime Minister earlier on today, in fact, in response to the Honourable Leader of the Opposition's question, because it was a perfectly fair primary question, and I did not allow the Prime Minister to dump on the questioner. But that question was highly provocative. And I cannot, as Speaker, stop a minister from responding to a highly provocative question. And I think the Prime Minister was, in fact, when the honourable member stopped him, he was actually not saying anything provocative. He was actually referring to some information with respect to taking responsibility for, because I think that's what the question was, taking responsibility for his own government. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Point of order, the Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr. Speaker, not so much on the substantive point of order, but on the comments that you made while you were ruling to the two colleagues on my left. I'd just like to remind you, sir, that you warned the Prime Minister twice about interjecting or speaking while you're on your feet without threatening to throw him out earlier today.
Well, I take the honourable member's reminder in the order. A point of order is being considered in the form which was offered. Now, has the honourable Leader of the Opposition? No, we actually the Prime Minister. No, the Right Honourable Prime Minister was actually referring to some information to answer the last question. I'll allow him to continue that.
So, Mr. Speaker, I was referring to this very useful, I think, important document produced by the Minister of Finance that simply shows over the last 2 years the real increase in after-tax wages under a national government has been 9%, and I myself must say I was shocked that under a Labor government of the last 2 years it was minus 1%.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. In respect of the responsibility that the Prime Minister said that he would accept, is he taking responsibility for the fact that power companies have charged the 15% GST on electricity prices to consumers for the month of September before it even came into effect? And who benefits from that, the power companies or his government?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I take responsibility for the administration of the law, and as the member would know, if he went and looked at the rules around the pricing of GST components, then the power companies have probably acted within the law. But my point would be, I think all of us are a little bit disappointed that they've chosen to act that way. And the Minister of Revenue actually had worked with a lot of businesses around New Zealand to accommodate them if there was an unusual situation. Had they approached the government, then I think we would have given them an exemption for that.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, why should a family which in September faced a nearly 20% increase in food, vegetable prices, that faced big increases and premature increases in their power prices, that if they lived in the Auckland region faced a rental bill $23 a week higher than this time last year, a family that's faced time and again government-imposed increased charges like ACC, why should they feel better off?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, because if one looks across all of the component factors, then one needs to look at a number of things. Firstly, what is the overall inflation rate when taking into consideration the whole basket of goods across the economy? And what we know is under a national government it's been running at 1.5%, and when Labor left office it was 5.1%. The second thing one needs to look at is what have been the tax cuts that have been in place under the two governments. The answer is under a national government they've been significant. Third thing one needs to look at, Mr. Speaker, is has there been wage increases? And the answer is under a national government there has been, but they reflect the cost of living. So the reason, Mr. Speaker, that that family should take some comfort is because by and large, for the most part, their wages are rising faster than the rate of inflation.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, can he confirm that families are likely to face an inflation rate of 4%, over 4% by the end of this year, by around 5% by mid-next year,